Hi everybody, thanks for making it through to nearly the end of the day. I think we're down to the last two sessions now, so there's been a lot going on. In this session we're going to talk about knowledge management, and just jumping straight in, this is really the challenge that I think a lot of companies are facing right now. We build these integration projects and we get bombarded with information from so many different places that it's difficult for us to manage this. So if I think about some of the common ones we see is we all have these integrations where we get the requirements on an email, and you may have like 10 bullet points if you're lucky, and you've got to build an integration off the back of that. Nowadays, Teams empowers us, but it also gives us another problem that your requirements might just be a Teams message. You might have channels for integrations. We still have SharePoint, we have vendor documentation, spreadsheets, things like people often move on from an organization. You might have knowledge transfer, documentation, indexes, and there's all these different sources of information that I think people I speak to just really find it overwhelming about how do I keep on top of managing my integration platform with all of this stuff to manage. So we're going to talk about that problem today. Now, before I jump into the details, I just want to do a quick shout out. So there's a blog article here. So for the session earlier today and this session, I've put a couple of blog articles with a couple of videos on, and I'm going to show you two projects today in our Document360 product. So I've put the links for these projects here, so you can go and have a look at them. And these are like examples of what documentation could look like. I think I've had some good feedback off people actually on these. So what I might do is ask if anybody's interested in collaborating on what good documentation could look like. We can maybe use these projects as like just an example that people can use in the community. So if you've got thoughts on this, please reach out to me, but that blog article should hopefully help people. Now, we're going to go through a few use cases here around different types of documentation, and I'm going to show you some of the things that I've seen customers doing with Document360. We're going to show you some features in Turbo360 that we have that can help with this. Really the root project problems though, if I'm with a customer, is you have things like, I can't find my documentation. It's such a common problem. The project ended 6 months ago. We've suddenly had this issue with an integration that's been working fine for a long time. Nobody knows where the documentation is for it. That's quite a common problem. Dave left six months ago, and nobody knows where he left his documentation because nobody's touched that integration since. We find that a lot of people have a very fragmented approach to documentation. So that last slide where everything's scattered all over these different sources. There's big problems around ownership. So who owns the document, who consumes it? Is there a transition from the person who built the project, wrote the documentation, but they're no longer the consumer after go live? And actually, the other problem is time to write documentation is a big challenge. So getting to the end of a project and everybody does their best efforts in the last couple of weeks before the project ends. Whereas can we change the culture to make documentation something easy to do ongoing? So as I say, we're going to look at a few different use cases. The first one I'm going to look at is API documentation. So we know that there's different kinds of APIs that people build in their organization. This one here is an example where I've got, sorry, just bear with me a second. So I've got my API up here that I've built. This is one of our demo APIs. So I've got API management, I've got a function backend, Cosmos DB. And in order for my API to be successful, I need to make sure that my consumers or users have a good experience of coming to my API, find out what does this even do, why would I want to use it, how can I use it, how does the security work, and there's a whole bunch of problems there. So just a quick heads up, this QR code down here in the URL is basically just a link to the projects that I'm going to show as we go through stuff. So one of the things we can do with Document360 is we can take an export from API management and we can put that into Document360 to help us document our API. This use case is really about APIs I'm going to expose for somebody else to use. Now we're going to look at a bit more in a moment at the details of how to do that. But when I think of my integration team, I don't just have APIs I'm going to give to other people. There's also APIs that I may consume from other companies or other applications, and I want to manage documentation they might give me, a spec they might give me, but also my own notes about how to use it internally in my team. So really this one's what I'd usually refer to as an outbound API, where our integration platform goes through APIM to somebody else, but I still need that good documentation. So the developer who did project 1 now and uses 2 operations, what can he do now that helps the developer in 3 months' time when we have another project using the same API? So what we need good documentation. Ideally, we'd like some automation to reduce the overhead, and we'd like to have some context to explain what is it doing. So if I go over to Document360 here, so I've got this project that, this is one of the ones that's the public one. So I've got an experience that's a bit like a typical knowledge base online. So here I can click the, I can pretty up this homepage to look like whatever I want. But I can click API documentation, and I can see that I've got this external booking API that I've exposed. And I've got things like on this homepage, there's some context here where I've gone in and written, this is what my API does, this is how I use it. I've got some information for the developer that's security based, and it explains, how do you connect and authenticate against my API. And then I've got some examples of documentation here, which actually gets generated. So if we have an API spec, we can use that to generate documentation about what my API does. So in API management, I've made a nice API with some examples in it, a little bit of help about what it does. And with Document360, so I'm going to go now into the back end of Document360. And you can see here I've got multiple projects for different things. So this is the case where, if you're a partner, you could have a project per customer. If you're an internal team, you might have a project for your integration team, a project for your web team, or something like that. And here, this is the author side. So if I go into my project here, my internet's acting up a bit. There we go. So here, this is the author side. And if I want to build a new API, so I can go up here, click New API, and I can choose the definition. So if I just export an API definition, I can say upload it, and I can just upload that. That'll automatically generate the API documentation over here. So things like my book and save and my book and get. But then I can go and edit manually to add other pages, add this context information here. And I can make this API documentation more rich, more user-friendly. Now, what you also get with Document360 though is because it's really come from a history where API documentation is just one of many things that it does. It comes with all the authoring tools like content approval workflows and that kind of thing that you would expect from proper technical writing tools. So you'll get those more advanced knowledge-based features. Now, what works quite well when I go beyond just importing the data, we can also execute our API direct from the documentation. So if you imagine this public user building an app, I come in, I've got an API key, and I can just go straight into the documentation here. I'll go to the page with my example on. So I've just put a booking ID in here. I can go and execute it. You can see I get a sample response back. So that went executed my API in API management. It's called my function, called my Cosmos, returned the data. And I've even got things like examples that I can put in, which came from my API management spec. So really what I'm saying here is I can go from 0 to quite nice rich documentation in really just a few minutes is all it took me to set this demo up. Now, we think what was quite interesting listening to the keynote earlier, I think it was David in the keynote was talking about how his company had custom built some features to do their API documentation. Really what we're hoping with Document360 is it becomes a platform to let you build this API documentation, really to take you to the next level. Now, what I can do that I thought was quite cool as well with API documentation is I can actually automate that refresh of my documentation. So imagine I've created my API documentation, I've added some manual context, but every time I make a change, check it in and deploy it, I can add details to a DevOps pipeline. And this is one of the videos on the blog post to show you how to do this. But basically, you can just install with npm the Document360 package. Small bit of PowerShell can pull out an API spec from API management, and then a small little command against this Document360 utility refreshes all of that spec into your documentation. There's your update. So you can actually put that as part of your deployment pipeline, or you can do it as a separate authoring step. So hopefully that gives you a nice way to create richer API documentation. Now, what we're going to look at next is, well, I think I've skipped ahead here. Right, collaborative documentation. So this use case, we're going past API documentation and we're thinking about my integration team now. So that use case at the start where we had all these different sources of information, how do we manage that as a centralized team knowledge base? We want to kind of get that under control a bit. So what we're going to do, if you think about our Azure integration services, we have a Document360 project for the integration team, and we're going to start doing what some of our customers are doing about creating our knowledge management to help the different aspects of our team. And it can be things like support runbooks, it can be things like release notes, but then you go beyond that, you've got team practices. I need to go and do a review of my team members. What are their learning plans? What are our sprint retrospectives? So I'm going to show you an example now. So this one here is in that second project, which you can get from my blog post. And here I've got the structure. So you can see it's a bit like docs.microsoft.com, was Saravan was saying earlier. So that help file with tree view down the left, you click on, different links, and you can put your documentation in here. So this is the this is the kind of deployment or published version. You can also have the editor, which I've shown just before previously over here. So I can go and edit content here, publish it, and then I can view it either in the editor or in the published version. But what we can do, with the documentation is, sorry, I just lost my train of thought a second there. So what we can do with the documentation is we can think about the different use cases of why we need this. So some of the common ones that I've seen, if we think, let's start with architecture. So a common example might be, I need an integration catalog that's not specific to any technology. So I might start with, a list of all of my different integrations here. I've got a couple of examples. So this is the kind of thing where I'm looking for people in the community to tell me what kind of info as a best practice should we capture here. So I've got things like my employee integration. So you can see if we go into tree view here, I've got that under my HR interfaces. I've got a bunch of metadata I'm capturing about who's the owner, a diagram of what it looks like, what systems are involved, and those kind of things. Now, one of the things that I find is that this interface catalog becomes really important for people outside of the integration team, because we know what all the components do, but our business stakeholders who own these different integrations, or the application teams, come along with questions like, which integrations talk to SAP, which integrations talk to Dataverse, who is it, who's the owner of this integration, when does it run? These are the kind of things that your interface catalog would capture, and we think this is a good place to record that. If we go beyond, again, still in the architecture area, one of the other common bits of documentation that I like is this building block idea. So here's an example of a building block that I used in a previous project where it's kind of a bridge between service bus messaging, where we've got transactional messages going on, and we want to push it into the data factory, into a data lake, so we can process it with Spark jobs and Synapse. And if you think about you as a developer, I might be building a new integration, and this building block might allow me to leverage getting data into my data platform. So if you're this developer on the new integration, how do you know that that building block exists? Where would you find information about how to do it? This is where we think, just natively in your knowledge base, create a building block area, common, common patterns that you use and common reusable components you can document here. We go beyond architecture now. We start thinking about some of the projects. So here, this idea of project documentation, which has a life cycle. So the project starts, they create a business case, they create requirements, you build something, you produce test evidence, the project goes live, the project ends, and then there's a transition into production. And there's like a cut-off point where, because the project ended, the project documentation probably never gets changed beyond that because there's no project and there's no resources to do it. But your long-term sustainable integration platform, you still need to be able to find that documentation, and you need to deal with the fact another project may come along and change that integration. So this is where we think keeping all of your project documentation in the knowledge base, again, it makes it so it's all in one place and you can find it. You can reference things that the business users may have other resources that are outside the integration platform, but at least you can index to them from here. So we were thinking, like with a project, you'd capture things like, what's the aim of this integration project? What's the business context? We might capture things like specifications. So maybe a business analyst would go in here. They can use some, everybody probably knows from previous integrates, I'm a big fan of the Gherkin syntax for capturing requirements. So you might document your scenarios of given an employees in the HR system, etc., etc. That means that you can look at this easily in a year's time. You know where it is because it's all in the previous project section. We think people will want to use things like developer guidance. So for example, what are my standards and expectations in the team? When do we use logic app standard? When do we use API management, etc.? So this is where we can capture our standards next to our project documentation. We might have things like, say, runbooks. So for example, here I've got a runbook for my partner portal application. So you can see I've made some notes on what is it. I'm trying to communicate to a support engineer. When somebody says we've got a problem with a partner portal or the partner portal's integrations, how do you even know where to start troubleshooting this? So if you've got runbooks here, you can go and learn a bit about what it does. You can link back. So this is where I'm a big fan of, right, where's the links back to the project documentation? If you need to make code changes, where is the code? Links to the the repos and stuff. But being able to make sure you can find where the documentation for this application is a good start. Now, again, there's a lot of extra pages in here showing examples of what we could do. Some of the ones that are quite like, I guess if we pick this one here, so this is the one I talked about in the previous session. If you remember, I said one of the important things to do is to tell people about your success stories. So when it comes to cost management, we made a practice of capturing things like, how much were our expected savings when we made the change and reviewed it? How much did we actually save? What was it we did that helped us, realize this cost savings? This page just documents those changes I discussed in the previous session. But if you've got this library of, successful cost stories, that inspires other people to learn about what you did, to see if they can do something similar here. We then go beyond things like release notes. So down here, most products that you'll buy, you'll look at release notes, but do we really have a great story for release notes in our integration platform? Well, here maybe we can create pages where we say, what's this release about? Metadata here for things like what's the change number? Links to the project documentation. We can have little checklists that you'll see down there showing us, have we done all the things that we need done? So we've got test results captured with a change, our deployment pipelines are green, etc., etc. And then we can document the steps. Where is the pipelines that we're going to run? So this is almost like your implementation plan for this change coming together within your knowledge base, so it's there when you need to review it. Maybe that idea of 3 months ago, the person who left did a deployment. You now need to make a change to that application. I know Sandro has been working with me a while back on just this problem. Nobody's touched this app for ages. What's the implementation plan to deploy a change to it? Because nobody's touched it for a long time. And then we go to things like sprint retrospectives. We can capture sprint retrospectives in here. What did we love this sprint? What worked well? What didn't work well? We do team meetings, and actually one of the ones I quite like as an idea, I don't know if anybody else does this, but team journal. So in the month of May, what are the things that I'm working on? Where's the links to where the different bits of documentation about those are? It's such a little thing, but if you think there's a big thing about in life, a lot of people do journaling now. If you can get into the practice as a team of journaling what things you've been working on, when somebody leaves the team, which will always happen at some point, there's no need to do this massive knowledge transfer exercise, because if anything, you just need to go back to that person's journal and you can see what they were working on each month and all the links to the different documentation. So I hope that gives you a flavour of some of the many ways that we're using Document360 internally in a team. Next, let's go on to Turbo360 now. So we've got a few documentation features in here that I think will really help people. So number one, we've got generated documentation for Azure. So think of this documentation. It's not the custom context stuff that, things like business requirements are different. This is really about things like, what have I deployed in Azure? What's changed in Azure? How's my security context set up? And really the use case is more, if I'm asked to write this myself, it's going to take me, weeks to write it. The minute I start writing, it's going to be out of date because things change. I'm probably going to be so bored from writing it that I'll want to go and jump in the canal. It's not the things that we enjoy doing. So anything we can do to automate this kind of documentation is good. It also, we've done a lot of projects where you've got compliance requirements, for example, SOC 2 requirements. You need to provide evidence to your auditor of certain things that you're doing. So again, if you can generate documentation for that, it's going to be a big win for you. So where we are here then over in Turbo360, we've released a new feature recently. So you'll notice the tree view on the left-hand side here. And one of the things we've changed is these scopes, so you can create documentation for different teams. So here, I'm in the Document360 area. I'm in their production environment, and I've got some documents that I can generate. So here, what I would do, if I want to create a new document, so we'll just call Mike's test document here. I'll pick a service principal, and then I can choose one of these different types of documents. So we've got a few different ones ranging from things like an executive summary. So that's really aimed at Saravana to say, what have you got in Azure? And as a CEO or director or senior manager, this is the kind of thing you might care about. We've got things like resource details, which is really low level, kind of audit of all of the things you've got configured and what their properties are. Resource audit I quite like because that tells me what changed in the last 30 days, which I think is quite a useful one. If you think about, if you've got a project where there's multiple different concurrent projects running with different developers building different integrations, how do you even keep on top of what's been deployed by different projects? So that gives me a place to start where I can see, in the last 30 days, these are all the different resources that have been changed or deleted or added. One of the ones I quite like, so this is a new one, we're investing quite a bit into this at the moment. So we've got a network diagram, so I can go and configure a document that will produce an XML file that's compatible with draw.io. So that means I can go, and I've got an example here. So in draw.io, I can import this and I can view it. And you can see here I've got a virtual network with a few subnets, and then I've got an NSG here, a network interface. That network interface is connected to a VM. We've got some public IPs and we've got some disks on here. So we've built this network diagram quite nicely covering the IaaS space at the minute. We're starting to work on introducing private endpoint support so we can hit all the PaaS resources as well. So I think, people who had an interest in Matthias' session previously, I think you'll find that this diagram could be really beneficial for helping you understand what the layout of your Azure network looks like. In addition to document generation, so these would be ones, I may schedule them to generate once a week or once a month for this team. We also have a little scratch pad over here where I can go and create a diagram, so I can have multiple. And what this will do is I'll choose, say, my Document360 prod environment here. And that'll go and create a diagram, and it'll let me pull in resources from my Azure environment. So I can say, right, let's have, let's say I'll have my front door or my WAF here. I don't know, maybe an app insight or something. So I can put these on. I can, doodle a little diagram together. I can put some notes on to, make some comments, put some other shapes on. And really, what I'm trying to do here is get a point where, as a team, you want to go and have a chat about this app, and you can just pull this diagram up. You can tweak it, juggle around with it, and it's just a really simple, low maintenance diagram that can help you tackle some of those documentation and diagramming problems. So we talked about some of the reports. I touched on a few. We've also got cost reports. I think I mentioned the RBAC report I quite like, so which users have access to your subscriptions, resource groups, which managed identities do. One of the videos that I've got on the blog post, which is quite cool as well, is I can do a DevOps pipeline that will trigger a document to be generated in Azure. So a scenario here, this actually came from a chat with Rick Hepworth, where he said, look, we build this application, we've got all the resources tagged with a specific tag. Can I make a document that I can trigger in my pipeline, and it'll look up all the resources and then produce a, like a report of what's been deployed? So we can do that. You can, any of the documents we've got, you can trigger from a DevOps pipeline. And there's an example in that video of how to do it. The next feature we've got, so just conscious of time, the next feature is the in-app wiki. So in Turbo360, one of the things that I wanted to do was move that support runbook closer to the tool that you support with. So I'm just gonna flip to my other environment here. Bear with me. Okay, so here we've got the business application module, and I've got a customer-facing applications in here. I've got my integration platform down here. In the HR area, I've got this interface called the employee benefits. So we'll probably talk about this a little bit more tomorrow. But in this app, I've got things like the logic apps that deliver the integration that supports my employees getting their benefits paid by the third-party benefit company. Now, in here, what you can do is you can go and choose the wiki. So just so I choose the wiki, and I've got some wiki pages here where I can just, in the application, I can make some notes about what this app does. Here I've just got a diagram. I've got some useful links. I can put some more pages. We had an incident, so I can capture some notes on that incident, and then next time we have an issue with this application, you can just see those notes straight in the application itself. So we think a lot of companies struggle with this idea where, your support tool's raising an issue, you come in, you have a look, and you're like, right, I can see where the problem is, what do I do about it? So the notes you made last time can help you the next time you get an issue. Just to give you a bit of roadmap view on the in-app wiki. So at the minute, we've done it with anything on any of the tree views in Turbo360. So this can be used in the cost analyzer module. I'm using it to capture cost reviews, so I can make notes on a review. We can use it in the business applications here for support runbooks. I can use it in business activity monitoring to tell business users how a business process works and tell them like what's going on. I think what we'll be doing next is we'll be looking at putting the wiki onto resources as well. So for example, if you go to a logic app, you can have wiki pages against that logic app in business apps, so you can make notes about what the common problems you have with it are. Things like an API management operation, you might have common problems with it, you can make notes there. So it's really about trying to empower those level 1, level 2 support people to better support the stuff in Turbo360. Okay, so in summary, where we're at really is we want to sort of offer up Turbo360 and Document360 as the way you can help manage that knowledge that's been such a big problem in the past. Instead of having all these disparate sources, you can never find anything. Document360 can help you for API documentation. It can be from Azure, but it can also be from other things. It can help you with your internal team documentation. If you're a partner, it can help you with documentation for customers. So you can have this common way of working across different customers. And then again, Turbo360 can generate some documentation, which we think will save you a bunch of time. And then the in-app wiki, we think, will take your support experience to the next level. Thank you for listening to my session today. I hope that was useful for anybody. If anyone wants a demo of anything in a bit more detail, please just come and see us at the booth and we can organise that for you. Otherwise, I hope you enjoyed that session and thank you for listening.